I will start by thanking our amazing guest and Foster's in-house writing guru, Sasha, for joining us. Thanks for making the time, man.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here.
Sasha's story is where I want to start, because I think that in and of itself actually now is a book, but is worthy of many more volumes. So I'm going to start with kind of Sasha's story, and then we're going to get into a lot of the kind of writing advice and guidance and techniques, and a lot of like Sasha's experience working with clients as a coach. And he just has a very broad perspective on the challenges that writers face, having gone through it himself, but also now working with countless other folks as a coach and mentor. Sasha, I'm going to start at the very beginning of at least my understanding of your story with this question. How did the 4-hour work week impact your life?
That book had a pivotal influence on my life. So at the time, I had just started out as a freelance writer, and things were going quite well, but my life overall was pretty static still. Like, it looked like it did before, except I was just writing in public, which I hadn't been. But I was working as a bartender at a fancy pasta restaurant. I was living in Toronto, where I'd lived for my whole life. And then I read this book, and the whole idea of lifestyle design, that you should just, instead of thinking of your life as this linear thing where you're on this sort of like quest and the initial coordinates made it obvious where the final coordinate should be, you should just do that for 40 years and then retire and then like take a break when you're like 70. That was the idea I had. And this idea that instead you should just think of, okay, absent any constraints at all, what lifestyle do I want? And, you know, you've read the book, I assume, or not. Have you read it? Yeah.
It's a rite of passage. Absolutely.
Yeah. So in it, Tim Ferriss lays out a very ambitious plan for how you're supposed to make a remote business that's fully automated so you can get rich while working 4 hours a week, as the title says. I am not so agentic or disciplined or, you know, scrupulous in my behavior. So I managed to like flip basically like 2 bits of my life. I managed to change like where I was living and how I was approaching my life in general. I didn't end up establishing a fully remote business. I did consider a novelty soap business, and I made some inquiries into like soap manufacturer. Had some sourcing conversations, but I just ended up like moving to Asia and changing my approach to life, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess this is we'll I guess decide now how much into your background we'll go, but where did the realization that, oh my God, I might actually be able to make a career as a writer start to come into play as you started with these side businesses, as you went from bartending to moving to Asia? Where did the writing actually start in this kind of journey?
So it's very funny. Maybe not that funny, but I think my journey is particular. It's not particular in the sense that I felt a lot of sorrow and anxiety for a long time. But the period of sorrow and anxiety is from about 17 to 23 years of age. Like at about 17, I was like, people have always told me I'm very verbal. I naturally have inclinations toward storytelling and maybe some self-mythologization, but I was like, okay, I'm writing now. I'm a writer. That's my identity. And I took it super, super seriously. And I was a tortured literary person, and I didn't produce anything. It was very low efficiency. There was a lot of just like negative mental activity and not a lot of typing. I took it, I did some things right. I was reading literary classics in a very intentional way. I took writing craft really seriously. I thought about it a lot, but I didn't produce enough. And then I had a mental breakdown and I just quit. I was like, writing's bad. I don't want to do writing. Writing, not for me. And I started a career as a singer-songwriter, which lasted for like a couple of years. And then towards the end of it, I met a magazine editor who liked my record. And my perspective on writing had softened somewhat since I just declared that I was no longer writing a single word of prose for the rest of my life. And I said to her, like, hey, I've been thinking about writing something for a magazine about my history with like mental health and art and stuff. How do I pitch a magazine piece? What do I do? And she was like, well, that was a magazine pitch, basically, and it sounds good. So why don't you go away and write it? And that piece won a Gold National Magazine Award. And then I was like, oh, I guess I should write. Everyone basically agreed that I was much better at writing than I was at singer-songwriting, which is true. And initially I didn't think of it as a living. I just thought of it as a side hustle. Like I was playing guitar and like singing prettily to people, but quickly it became apparent that writing is what I should do.
Yeah, no, Mikkel Clark in the chat, and I was going to point this out as well. Are you even a writer if you don't have a mental breakdown and a phase with music? I know at least Lyle on the call used to be in a metal band. I don't know about the mental breakdown part, but at least the metal music is there. I would never consider myself on the level of Sasha here, but also dabbled with music. There's definitely a part of the brain that, has some overlap. I guess when
I think in my experience, all writers want to be musicians. All musicians want to be painters. All painters want to be writers. There's this like recycling circle of like artists longing for each other's lives that I've encountered.
I know, and nowhere in that circle do people directly, want to go get the highest paying job and sit behind a desk or behind a computer. It's truly tough to escape that center of gravity. So when, I guess, maybe did it dawn to you that like writing a book would be, a project worthy of your time and ambition? Because I know that's no small undertaking, but where did you kind of get this idea to actually write, a full-on book about your story, which I can't imagine was too light of an undertaking?
Yeah, books are hard. I think like one good thing about, so when I was in that period of suffering I was talking about from 17 to 23, I thought of myself as like becoming an entity, right? My focus was on like, I'm going to be a great author. So to be a great author, I'm going to have a great novel. And as a result, like every fucking week, I had some new idea for the novel I was going to write that was going to enshrine me as a genius for all of eternity. And that's not a great place to work from. When I was coming at it from a perspective of like, okay, I've just been a musician and that was okay, and now I'm 25 and I should be doing something. I was just looking to like entertain people. And so I wasn't as insistent on thinking like I need to do a book right now, but it was something that I knew would come along eventually. And I met an agent who thought I had some potential, and she was like, well, you should be working on a book at some point. And the idea of it doing a chess book hadn't actually occurred to me originally. I was just like addicted to chess. After I wrote a piece about chess, it was a piece about me being addicted to chess, and at the end of the piece I talked about why I should quit chess. Declaring I'm quitting things and then not doing it is a common theme in my life. At the end of the piece I declared that I quit chess, and then I didn't. I was addicted to chess, and my agent was like, you should write a book. And I was like, well, I'm having a hard time because I'm still playing chess all the time. She's like, well, then you should write a chess book, idiot, in so many words. And then then I did.
Yeah, and this is something you mentioned earlier, but I'm curious if it reared its head during this period as well, is like this notion of inefficiency, or like writing being really kind of this like torturous, stereotypically love-hate type of activity. And I guess I'm curious if during this time you started to either change that mindset, or if that relationship with writing still existed to where it was this kind of mighty struggle, or if you started to kind of get towards a bit more of like a healthy or less painful relationship with the craft.
Yeah, definitely. I was definitely in a more healthy place. And I think it was just like part of it was the parameters of my life. So I started working as a freelance journalist. And if you're a freelance journalist, you have deadlines and you have structure and you need to make money. Like at that point, if I didn't write, I didn't have money to pay for my rent and food. So that somewhat like that makes your kind of inner struggles irrelevant, or like, you somehow manage to surmount them when, you have $300 at the end of the week, or you don't. As well, I think like previously what I had done is pictured creative life as this like Lord of the Rings style journey up a forbidding mountain with monsters, and like, I had to slay the dragon of literary craft. And when I was doing freelance writing, It was more like what a creative life should be, which is just like a series of experiments with different parameters. Like, okay, some of the pieces I'm going to work on are small, some of them are big, some of them are personal, some of them are not personal. Like, and there are a variety of expectations and a variety of motivations, not thinking about it as this like homogenous thing, which is very brittle, right? Like, if you're thinking of yourself as some artistic image and then you're trying to live up to that image, it's kind of like a pass fail thing. And the test is like too vague to be helpful, but precise enough to be punishing. So you're just paralyzed forever. Whereas if you're just writing a bunch of little things, it's like, all right, well, this piece worked out better than I expected. This one worked out worse than I expected. And over time, I'm gathering all sorts of data about little parts of my brain and my own persona as a writer, but it's not some sort of like, you know, Mission Impossible thing.
Yeah, and this is something I was excited to talk to you more about, given that not only have you gone on this journey yourself, obviously writing the first book, writing magazine pieces, doing freelance journalism work, freelance writing, but obviously you've now worked with some number of other writers and people maybe on a very wide range of spectrums on like where they are in their own journey. And what are maybe some of those things that if you could get, you know, into a time machine and visit yourself at age 17 that you often find bringing up to clients and the challenges you often see people who are just trying to get the boulder rolling? You know, are there any just patterns or recurring themes in the work you do with the people you help produce more?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge one is like you have a received idea of like what a writer should be and some sort of abstract idea of who you should be as a writer. And that's almost always incorrect. Like, the beauty of writing is that you walk around thinking that you think about things and thinking that you know what you think, and then you sit down to write and you're like, what is this shit? Like, what is this stuff that's actually inside my brain? Like, this is appalling, right? And so a lot of people are paralyzed because they accumulate sort of like notions of what sort of an artist they should be. And then they struggle under the weight of those notions. Those notions might not have anything to do with what they actually care about. Like, one thing that's startling is during discovery calls, I'm like, okay, what have you been thinking about writing? And then follow-up question, what have you actually been thinking about? Like, what's obsessing you recently? What are some images you can't get over? What's like recurring lines of dialogue in your head? And often those things are like completely different. And new clients are like, you want me to write about that stuff? And I'm like, yeah, because that's actually what you care about. So that's where you should start, which is not obvious to people. It's funny, we live in a very like individualistic culture in some ways. We're atomized. We all have the power to express ourselves. But also, I think in this world that's so powered by like, you know, notifications and little hearts on Twitter and social approval, we can like come up with some idea of what we should be thinking about or what we should express. It's like we have a lot of the drawbacks of individualism, but we're somehow missing some of the benefits where people are actually like, you know, actualized, introspecting and stuff. So forget your image of who you should be as a writer and just introspect is like one of the pieces of advice I give over and over and over again. Another thing is just people not trusting their ability to like make sense. I think sense making is like kind of like walking. Like, humans are storytelling creatures. We're also walking creatures. Think really hard about how you're walking, like you actually like manually direct your muscles, you become terrible at walking. And I think writing is often similar, where you can just trust your ability to lay facts out in a way that's legible to other people if you demand yourself to. Like, if you just say, okay, I'm going to write a post or an email explaining my feelings about something, you do better than you think. Like, a priori, from first philosophical principles, how should a person write? Like, what is literary? What is interesting? So just instructing people to get out of their own way is a big thing that happens over and over again. And that was my issue too. Like, I was in this fancy pants comparative literature program, so I was constantly reading like James Joyce and then like near Middle Eastern religious texts. And I was thinking, wow, there are all these enchanting ways of writing. Now let me come up with some way of writing of my own that's completely different, which is like a rabbit hole that I fell down for years. And there were no resources in that rabbit hole. That was just a waste of time.
Yeah, got it. There's so much there that I want to kind of unpack. And one is and Mikkel also highlighted that distinction being really important. Like, what have you actually been thinking about versus what you've been thinking about writing? And that disparity is going to be pretty telling. The fact that there is a disparity is pretty telling. One thing I thought with Foster, we have an application process where people apply to join and we review each person who is applying to join. And one of my biggest, like, I don't know what you'd call it, lesson or like surprises from that process, like if you took our wait list, you stripped out the names, you removed all the formatting on the blog, and you just put all the writing samples into a Google Doc and put them all side by side, you would think half of it was written by the same person. It is the morning routines that, led to my success. It is my new Notion setup that's going to change my life. Not to knock those topics, but just to, I think, highlight.
I want to knock those topics. I'm done hearing about them. Don't tell me about your Notion setup. I don't care.
Yeah, maybe let's do it, because I too have some spicy opinions. But honestly, that was like somewhat jarring. And to be clear, I'm confident I've been guilty of this from time to time as well. But that has been such an eye-opening experience where you can just feel the shoulds embedded in the writing. I should be writing about productivity. I should. That's what I'm seeing on Twitter. That's what I'm seeing elsewhere. What do you kind of, first of all, I know you touched on it a bit, but like, what is your theory on where that, I don't know, mimetic impulse comes from? And then two, how do you advise people to kind of break that and become more introspective and like get out of these cyclical, whatever, these echo chambers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked me where the mimetic impulse comes from, but that's you're sort of answering your own question. Like, I think it's just a mimetic impulse, and it's the classic human trait of seeing other people's outsides and comparing them to our insides. You know what I mean? Like, there are creators who are doing very well, who write about writing and write about productivity, your David Perel's and Tiago Fortes and all those guys, and you think like, oh, they're doing well, they have their businesses that they're running, I should do similar things. And it's like, it's too late. By the time those guys exist and they're doing what they do, it's too late to be those guys. So they got to be their own guys by being themselves, and also by being savvy businessmen and very, very smart. But like, the next thing, whatever it is going to be generated by someone who's being true to themselves. And also, like, I think, so one thing I ran into a lot when I was doing these monthly sessions on Compound is people were like, how do I build a personal brand and a business, and how do I find my monopoly? And it's sort of like taking for granted that your writing life should have a certain shape and structure, which I think is a recipe for misery. I think you should write, you should express yourself, you should see what happens in the world, and then use that as an ingredient in your life to modify your living ways. I think if you sit down thinking, I'm going to find my personal monopoly and I'm going to engineer the things that the most people want to hear about, you're probably not going to be very happy. Your writing's probably not going to be very good. The thing about people who are very successful writing about productivity all the time is that's literally all they think about. If you are similar, then that's great. Do that. But if you aren't, and most people aren't, then, don't.
I was about to say, God, there are so many, Mikkel's got some quotes here that are just the highlight reel. What are like some of the, let's talk about note taking for a second. I've got some opinions here, but they're half baked, and I'd be curious not only to get your take, but see if this is an example of some of what you're saying. So I think with note taking in particular, I love what you just said about, by the time someone else is being very successful with something, it's too late. The next Bill Gates won't look like Bill. They're not going to create an operating system or whatever. There's the trope in startups, but also true for kind of writing. And I think often we draw this like, there's this, I don't know, natural impulse to think that what worked for someone else will work for us. The amazing note-taking system that helps X person produce fantastically interesting work will also help us do the same. But my sense is that, like, for a lot of folks, it's not the apps, it's not the note-taking, it's not their system for reading that's like the bottleneck. It's more like, I don't know, self-confidence, their ability to trust their perspective, their courage to publish something that's a little out there and weird. Is that kind of what you're touching on with like where people should maybe be starting to spend more time and like you know, putting more effort to actually produce better work.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I totally agree. I think we have similar thoughts on note taking, which is that like, you know, I I don't care for it as a solution to your creative issues. I think if you're a person who has a lot of trouble, like if your work requires you to know what a bunch of research papers from a certain field say, so you need to archive a bunch of stuff, that's great. Like you need a note-taking infrastructure if that is the case. If not, I'm sort of skeptical of it. I keep sort of a commonplace book, which is just like, if there are things I like, I put them in there and it's not particularly organized. I think that's the best setting for a lot of people. I also think like, this whole note-taking mindset can get you thinking in this destructive way where you're like, what I need to do to have a creative life is to prepare to have a creative life. I need to assemble all of the tools to make my creative life work out well. And that's not, to have a creative life, you just need to start producing. I mean, I define creative writing as like anything you write where you don't know what you're going to write. Like if you're writing for an instruction manual for a chainsaw, like that's, you should know exactly what you're saying. And if you're writing like an email to your boss, like that's not particularly creative. There's some creativity involved in like the social codes, but like, you know, so the more you like monoculture your creative life and you think about exactly how you're going to structure it, I think the less creative you become in general.
Yeah, and what do you with I love that distinction. I think that's fantastic. I think yeah, I don't know. I've always felt like there's this human desire to just, first of all, this deep uncomfort, this deep discomfort we have with ambiguity and like not knowing, which I think sometimes manifests itself in like wanting more control than we actually have over a process or a system or like whatever. It's very hard for us to just handle the ambiguity of like whatever what we do. I often think of this in the context of like finding a niche when people are starting off or whatever, for to use the common language, where it's like if you're too strategic, you run the risk of just killing the joy. And somewhat to the analogy you made earlier of like learning how to walk, if you're too, like self-aware and like watching your every muscle movement, you just tense up and your stuff's uninspired and it just is kind of boring. And thereby you fail. And like, it was kind of a failed experiment to begin with. But this is getting to a question, which is when maybe like a new client of yours comes to you and they're basically just trying to get going. What advice do you find yourself giving them for, starting a regular practice of showing up and like doing the work and starting to kind of dust off and uncover their perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with just mental reframing. Like when you write a first draft, don't think of it as like a facsimile, your first draft of like your first thing. Don't think of it as like a shitty facsimile of the perfect project that's eventually going to happen. Think of it as like research. Like you're writing a bunch of stuff and you're wandering into a mental territory. You've never been there. You're building a map of it eventually, but you're sort of building a map with it built from tools you find in the territory. So just consider it a process of exploration at first. And also like try to find the things you actually enjoy. The art critic David Hickey has this great distinction. He says that all creative work should be work and not labor. Whereas like work is like effortful, it wears you out, it takes energy, it's difficult at times, but it's actually like tractable and you don't hate it. But like labor is like breaking rocks with a pickaxe because someone tells you that you should, because they've got like a gun to your head, like that feeling. And it's like, once you sit down, if you're writing, some part of the process should be at least exciting, right? Maybe it's not even totally, maybe it's so anxiety ridden as a process that you're just like, you're just in like some fugue state, but at least the fugue state should be interesting. If you like start writing and you're 100 words in and you can't stand the sound of your own voice, then like something's wrong,
That's fantastic. And actually, Lyle, there's a few things I want to dive in there, but Lyle dropped a great question, which is like kind of reminiscent of like using outlines up front. Here are the 5 points I'm going to make, and then I'll go about filling them out. And I'm curious what you think about that as an approach to, writing a first draft or getting your first thoughts on paper. Is that kind of overly rigid in the model that you typically recommend with folks?
I don't think outlining is terrible. I just think it should be used as fuel and not a disciplinary mechanism. Like, you know, I think the best way to do an outline is don't do it if you don't need it. Like if words are just coming to your head and there's just a spume of words, don't stop and write an outline. Like just get the words out. Everything's going fine. Like don't question it. But if you need an outline, I think the way to do it is probably write like 3 to 5 points, look at them, and then forget that you have an outline. Just like have a vague sense of a sort of like ethereal structure in your head, and then just do it and see what happens. I think doing outlines up front can be a waste of time sometimes, because like you're always going to be wrong about where you're going to start and end something if it's your first draft. If it's anything longer than like 500 words, beginnings and endings are hard and they're not obvious at first. Like before you write an essay, you don't know how it begins and ends because nobody does. It's not, you know, it hasn't been determined yet. It gets determined when you write it.
Totally. I think that's fantastic. And actually, it's funny. So after, for anyone who hasn't, you know, worked with Sasha directly or isn't in Foster, one thing that I always really enjoy is seeing Sasha's epic notes after a core group meeting and seeing the bullet points of some of the advice that he shared and some of the takeaways and suggestions that he offers for folks. And I actually have some of my highlights here from previous notes you've shared in the past. And one is around rejection. And I think some of this was in the context of maybe like pitching a magazine to carry your stuff or pitching a publication. But I'm going to perhaps make a stretch here, but extrapolate rejection to just the broader sense of like putting out work that doesn't get a response or, you know, kind of flops. How do you think of rejection as a tool or just as a, I don't know, discipline in the overall process of creation? You know, what role does rejection play? How do you encourage people to like think about rejection? And maybe I'll leave it there.
What did I say before? It would be good for me to know what the highlight actually says, so I know what I'm riffing on.
Yes, totally. The specific note that I found is seeking out rejection from professional venues to immunize yourself is awesome. Some amount of rejection is totally inevitable. But consistent rejection can be a signal of needing to try a different channel. So that's the gist of the comment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, if you're not getting rejected regularly, you might not be doing something interesting. You might not be challenging yourself. You might not be pushing yourself. And rejection is totally inevitable. And I think like the more you get rejected when you're pitching and the more your stuff flops, the more. A big problem that people have early in their like writing practice is that they're too results oriented and results oriented in the short term. It's fine to be results oriented on the scale of like years or even months, but being result oriented in like the scale of days is like a terrible place to be. It is the experience of basically almost anyone who makes creative work that the outputs are sort of unpredictable. Like it's very hard to say what's going to catch on and what work of yours is going to be vital and what's really going to stick with people. And so like the more you get rejected, the more you realize that like it's okay, you're not going to die, and it's not, you know, you don't like need to get this piece accepted, or if people don't read this one essay you wrote, it's okay, there's going to be more stuff, there's going to be more opportunities. And also just like aim high. You know, I have this funny story with pitching the New York Times where I was contacted by an editor at the New York Times who saw some of my early writing, and he was like, "You're good, you should write for the magazine." I was like, "Cool, Times Magazine. Here are like 7 pitches." And all of them got rejected. One thing is I'm not a great fit for the Times Magazine. I'm just like, I don't care about the news cycle. I'm not very political. I think the whole structure of like newspaper media is sort of disgusting. I have respect for a lot of people who work there, but like media is terrible. But anyway, I eventually got into the magazine, and the way I did is that I flew into New York and I pretended I was there on business. I was like, and I emailed the editor. I was like, "Hey, I'm here on business. Would you like to have lunch with me?" And then he did have lunch with me. And then I worked it out with him in person. And there are 2 lessons in that. One is that like, you know, very few rejections are final. Like a lot in life is negotiable. If someone says no to something, maybe you can slightly modulate your request. And like a lot of people get what they want through being annoying or being willing to be annoying. And another thing is that rejections can be a signal that you need to change the method of inquiry. So like email wasn't working, so I had to do a pitch in person. Now I know that in-person pitches are almost always better than email pitches. So that was one form of a signal. If you write like one essay that you like that doesn't turn out, it doesn't mean anything. If you write like 7 and nobody reads them, that might be a signal about your distribution system or what you're writing about or how you're writing about it. But life is too noisy to take any single rejection seriously.
That's a great, pithy one-liner on how to like synthesize feedback. Cause I guess one thing I was curious about is just like rejection in the context of, say, like Twitter, or like trying to grow a Substack, or like just producing things that you're going to put out on the internet, where typically rejection isn't the formal type of rejection where, the New York Times magazine or the New Yorker or whatever is telling you no. Oftentimes rejection online is the silence of, 2 likes, one of them is grandma, and everyone else, no one's clicking through to your amazing article. So how do you, obviously you're very prolific and a big user of Twitter, and your Substack, is it daily? I mean, how often do you send out your Substack?
Wow, my Substack is not daily. It's been about weekly. I did the 30 essays in 30 days thing.
Yeah.
But my serialized novel will be weekly, and then essays will be about weekly too. So it's going to be bi-weekly for the foreseeable future, I think.
Perfect. And with that, I guess, like what has been your framing for trying to identify what's actually working? And do you think of using your Twitter and even your Substack as a discovery mechanism for where to spend more of your time? Or are you more kind of trying to passively build up some readership for, say, this novel that you've been kind of working on in the background?
Yeah, it's sort of both. I do gather some insights. I think like one consistent thing I've noticed is things are more popular if they contain something that someone could disagree with. Like if they're like a little spiky, which has led me not to be more antagonistic in general, but just like I think more authentic to how antagonistic I actually can be. Like being a little disagreeable is something that is consistently rewarded for me. But apart from that, again, it's just like so noisy. Like there's a lot of path dependency in internet popularity until you get to like 20,000 followers on Twitter, or like, 2,000 readers on Substack or some number. Like you're not going to get regular engagement for everything. And so I think just like a lot of shots on goal is good. Like I tweet a lot, and then like one day I got like 2 tweets with over 2,000 favorites that sparked, days long discussions that I didn't have any interest in participating in. And then like that week, nothing was popular, and I don't know why. I think it's hard. And I think like, hopefully over time, the incentives make you into the most interesting version of the thing you are naturally. That's what I'm trying to aim for. And in terms of thinking about like my niche or personal brand, I'm trying not to think about it in the sense that like, I want to build like a community that likes me for the weird person I am, that rewards me for doing the things that interest me most. I think the best way to do that is just through, a certain amount of chaos and experimentation.
Yeah, this is you've just set me up for my next question, which was going to be like, what are some of the kind of like, I don't know if popular advice is quite the right word, because obviously we're in a bit of a small corner of Twitter. But what are some of like the advice or common tropes in the writing Twitter sphere that you find yourself kind of disagreeing with? And we touched on maybe note taking, and I'd love to maybe hear your thoughts there. Yeah, what are some of those views that you have that are maybe a little counter to what you see a lot of other people saying on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pick on David Perel because he put this advice out there and people don't actually read the blog post where he advocated this. Like I kept hearing like, yeah, David Perel told me I should have a personal monopoly over and over again. And I got mad at him. And then I read the blog post about forming a personal monopoly. At the bottom, he says, for most people, this takes 5 to 10 years. And that's the footnote that they don't notice. I think like building a personal monopoly is great. Building a personal monopoly could be rephrased as like becoming a singular artist, or finding the thing you care about most. But the way to do that is by exploring as much as possible and like relentlessly as possible. Like before you have a lot of engagement or a career that depends on it, you shouldn't be like, oh, this tweet of mine got 7 likes as opposed to this tweet of mine that got 3 likes. Therefore, I should become the kind of person who tweets about the thing that gets 7 likes. Like, that's so stupid. Like, not only is the sample size just like way too small, but 2 options isn't enough. You should have 100 options. Like, I think an example in my own life is that I met my agent through writing a piece about a chef I work with in a lifestyle magazine. A restaurateur read it and she sent me a Twitter DM and I went out for a drink with her. She had an agent, so her agent became my agent. Initially, I wrote some like essays about like my mental health and my like sad childhood that did very well. If I kept going on that, I was like, I'm just going to grind on that. I'm only going to write about that. I wouldn't have encountered the social connection that led me to my book deal. I wouldn't have eventually become broad enough that my interest became chess and traveling around the world. Like, you know, I would have just been stuck in my initial little niche forever and I would have been limiting myself so much. So like the personal monopoly is a goal, but I don't think it's a goal you should think about for a long, long time, really.
I love that. Yeah, it's almost like this like almost like what matters are really like these almost like step changes, not like you said. So many of us have our sample size is too small. Like what does it really mean if one of your tweets got 50% more likes than your average tweet? Like it really is a poor signal. The other thing is like, I mean, this is now I'm just drifting into my territory of just pure opinion. But like the other thing is like the moment the fuel in the tank is going to be your personal interest in something. And like I've had, you know, my most viewed tweet is a fucking Google Docs tip where I said you can type in doc.new and it'll create a new document. That is my most read piece of writing ever by a huge margin. Obviously, I'm not going to go create a tech tips Twitter. I would jump off a building before I did that. So like that would be a horrible way to live because like it just wouldn't, you know, the only way you can really fail is just by quitting. And like you're going to quit if it's not fun anymore. So like anyways, I share, I think, some sense that like A, sample size is very small, but B, like it's hard to quantify your intrinsic interest in something. Because that I think is often going to like get your, you know, the Google Docs tip was hot though. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I did consider for a moment, but anyways, you're just going to quit early. I'd love to hear your kind of opinion on just like note taking and where kind of information management fits into, you know, the writing kind of process or how people should be thinking about that. I love your reframe on personal monopoly. What's your kind of reframe on note taking?
I guess to be extremely pithy and like contrarian about it, I think the best note-taking system is probably your subconscious mind, in the sense that if you encounter things that really resonate with you, that really interact with your core values and what you really think about the world, you're probably going to retain them and like think about them a lot. And they're probably going to be things that you're obsessed with. If you're encountering a lot of stuff that like aspirationally you think you want to write about and you have to like come up with some super intricate system to like maintain it all, you probably don't actually care about it that much. And I think like an invaluable part of the writing process is just like walking around aimlessly, thinking about what you've encountered recently and just introspecting and thinking like, what is really like, what's generating a feeling in my nervous system? I think note-taking systems are great for specific applications. I mean, again, if you're writing some paper on like, you know, serotonin receptors and you need like 100 different references and you're never going to remember them all, like, great, catalog them. You should, but that's a very specific, like, I think Alexei Guzzi probably has an incredible note-taking system and he needs it. I write about like chess, psychedelics, relationships, and vampires. Like, I don't need a note-taking system. Like, that would just be like personal grandiosity if I was like, I'm going to assemble like a 50-page Rome thing where everything gets perfectly categorized. It's like, categorize what? Like my impressions of like the mist in Budapest? Like, I don't need any of that.
Yes, I love that's a great pithy line. Best note is your subconscious mind. And I think we often have like this like a really elaborate not even elaborate note-taking systems, but a dependence on a note-taking system can create this like, to be fair and not to like straw man or whatever. I know a lot of a good note-taking system can be like making sure you're capturing your own perspective. But I think two things happen. One is our first action we take is looking for the thoughts of others and like going into our note-taking system, pulling some passages from other books. And that's great, but it's really great if you're doing curation work, and it's not quite as interesting if you're trying to like look inwards and like add something slightly different and new to a conversation. Two is we're always looking at outdated versions of ourselves. So like, what did I know 2 weeks ago that I haven't updated? Like in some sense, I should kind of be able to have the freshest perspective, and my latest thinking should always be kind of at the forefront of my mind when I go to write something. And so in some sense, it's like, come on, I don't, the most useful thing I find looking over my old notes, sometimes it is just like, oh, I forgot about that. But often it's like, wow, I can't believe how little I knew, or man, my mind has changed so much since then.
Yeah. Freshness is good. And there's lots of ways to fuck it up. I think also one other thing about note taking too is that I'm not anti-recording. I just think like, again, my system, and it's what I advocate, and I think it works for a lot of people, is what used to be called a commonplace book in Victorian times, which is a book that has stuff you like. It's just like a personal scrapbook of writing. I think like if a piece of text really inspires you, you should keep it around, but I don't think like thinking of it as like an academic work that you need to reference on a specific page of your thesis is the way to think about it. Like, just record it. I also think like in terms of note-taking creativity, an extremely underrated writing improvement technique is memorizing poetry. Like memorize a couple great poems and it will do something to you. I guarantee it.
Oh, I love that. That's not being talked about. So I want to go into your kind of upcoming book, but there's a few things there that I want to dive into. One is, I know we've got some folks on the call who are working on books. We also have plenty of folks on the call who are like, have a Substack that they've been actively growing. Why did you decide to not work with a traditional publisher for this book, whereas I think you did with your first? And what was your thinking behind using Substack as kind of like the distribution channel for this book? And maybe we'll start by, what's the book about? Well, maybe we start there.
The book is about a vampire who has an existential crisis when he discovers that the world might be a simulation, and he sets off to discover the truth and to find who's in control of the simulation. And he also is on a quest to end his 750-year-long period of ennui and angst. It's an idea. I was meditating one day and I was like, what's a silly thing I could write about? Vampires. And then I was like, that's stupid, but maybe it's not stupid enough. What would be even stupider? What about vampires and the simulation theory? And then it just made me laugh and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I couldn't get it out of my head. So I started writing a novel.
Great. And this is, which I think a lot of folks have ideas floating around that are not, would never work as an essay because they're just going to be way bigger. But like obviously writing a book is kind of a huge undertaking. So why did you kind of land on Substack and doing like this serialized approach versus again, maybe doing what you had done the first time around, which is a more traditionally written book with a publisher?
Well, I think part of it is just like career circumstances. So my first book was an incredible critical success and kind of a commercial failure. Like it didn't like do badly enough that anyone in my publisher wanted to commit suicide, but like, it was like on Howard Stern and like Good Morning America, and it was like Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, like everybody loved it, nobody bought it. Classic situation. And it's funny too, because like a year later, The Queen's Gambit came out and I was just like, man, I was just born a little too early. But anyway, so after that, it left me in a position where if I came up with a really, really super marketable nonfiction book idea, I probably could have gotten a book contract. And that's what I tried to do for a while. But it was just sort of like destroying my creativity. I wasn't getting anything done. I was like, what's going to upset people politically, or like, what's an interesting Gladwellian, pseudoscientific frame through which I can look at the world, blah, blah, blah. Like, and then like, just after a year of that, I hadn't written anything and I was just suffering. And then I was like, well, I want to write books again. Like I just like being creative, and I don't need to make money of a job. Um, so like, what do I actually enjoy? And Substack is just kind of like a forcing function a little bit. Like it's kind of just like terrifying me into finishing the novel. Like I have to publish a chapter a week, so it's going to happen now. The novel is going to exist. Writing my nonfiction book, I had structure. I had editors breathing down my neck. It was just a way of giving myself that structure. And also, I like the live performance aspect of it. One thing I really miss from music days is like whenever it's playing a show, like constantly interacting with an audience and using their energy to form a feedback loop. And writing a novel in public is sort of a way to get that back, even though the process is also pretty hermetic. And one of the things I'm offering in my Substack subscription benefits, I don't know if anyone's ever done this before, is like weekly writing parties where I'm actually writing my novel with other people on Zoom, not like with their input, but like they're around for the process. So just like making it less lonely and more scary, which is the kind of life I want to lead.
Yeah, and it's the exact type of adrenaline injecting motivation to force work to get done, which I love your framing there. And Tosh just asked, is your day job is kind of most of your time spent coaching? Is that been what's kind of freed up the economics for you to be able to experiment with this new format?
Yeah, about 60% of my money comes from coaching. I still do some like commercial writing and freelance stuff. I'm in the position where I basically only do this stuff that I really enjoy or it really pays well. So right now it's like writing for an IT company sometimes, which falls into the category of pays super well, fairly easy. Not my favorite, but you know, it's a job. And I also write artist catalogs for a Swedish gallery, which involves like meeting with artists and talking about what inspires them, like hanging out with painters in their studio and writing like basically like prose poetry about their art, which is just like incredibly fun. And like, so, you know, my career is composed of writing a Substack about vampires, coaching, writing for Swedish artists, and talking about like cloud, SaaS, VR video conferencing stuff. So it's not the way I planned on my career going, but it's very entertaining. I like it a lot.
One thing with as you've thought about kind of the new book and obviously even your coaching work, obviously the all the rage right now is obviously about like doing a cohort based course, 5 to 10 week program. Obviously, I think there's quite a few topics that would work for you, but have you considered exploring any of these other ways to kind of monetize your skills as a writer or your expertise and kind of quote unquote scale your coaching? Or you have the belief that like that could potentially become its own beast you have to manage and it would actually take you away from the writing. But I'm curious if you've thought about doing any of the whatever hot ways to monetize right now.
Yeah, that thing you just said is true. I mean, I think it would take away from things. I'm also not like I've never had a job for a reason. Like I'm not super like I'm not a great like business person. I'm not super great at administrative stuff. Like a coaching practice where I have like 10 clients at a time with like very meager administrative requirements, honestly, like already stresses me out quite a bit. There's also, I mean, like this might just be justification for the thing I just said, but I also think like there's a lot of limitations to the teaching creativity through cohort-based courses thing. Like creative lives are very individual, problems are very heterodox. Like I think like similar pathologies pop up over and over again, but like the details of them are incredibly specific. And I've had the experience over and over and over again while working with clients where like some weird assignment that I wouldn't suspect or some like a little offhand thing I said just like totally breaks the dam. And there's no way for me to get that going during a cohort-based course. And I have had like numerous clients who like went to one of these hot courses or like even like took an MFA and they're like, that didn't help me. And I'm like, well, maybe it's because it was designed for some average, but you're not some average. I think Compound is probably, or sorry, Foster. Foster is probably about the best shape for a writing program, which is just, it's a lot of writing and a lot of mutual feedback. And that's the core of it, because that's pretty much never an incorrect thing to do. But like, this is one example. Like I worked with this woman who's like tremendously accomplished, really smart, really funny, fun person. She's like really witty and charming to talk to. And her writing was so fucking serious. It was so boring. Like it was so boring to read. And like 2 sessions, we struggled with it. And then I just gave her an assignment I made up on the spot. I was like, write about the 2 stupidest topics you encounter this week. Like the things you talk about, like the 2 ones that are like the dumbest ideas, write it. And she wrote an essay about like mini golf and the porn star Sasha Grey's pubes. And that was like a magic wand over her whole creative life. And now she's writing like these amazing, really intense personal things. And it was just that moment of like letting go that did it for her. And like, that shouldn't be in a cohort-based course. That shouldn't be an assignment I assigned to lots of people, but it was the assignment for her. So I think all of this to say, I think something vital would be lost if I had some sort of rote approach that I was applying to multiple people.
God, I hadn't thought as much on that as I'd never heard that angle. And I think you're just spot on. Like there's just this edge at which we can very often get stuck for very personal, specific reasons. And it can be super tough to just have a catch-all homework assignment that gets everybody unstuck at the same pace. So I love that framing is on top of everything else you've said. I guess with 4 minutes on the clock, I wanted to get Lyle's question because I know Lyle has been working on a project of his own, but so have a number of other folks on the call. With the new book, and I think you maybe hinted at it, but I'm curious to get your answer. How much of that has already been written behind the scenes? And, you know, does releasing it in a serialized format make writing the whole thing more difficult in that? Is it the chaotic, I'm driving, you know, through a mountain in a foggy night at 100 miles an hour? Or do you have a pretty good sense of where you're going to take this?
I know how it's going to end, and I have about like the next 2 months of it written, but there's, you know, most of it is unwritten. I have like ideas. I think as basically everyone should, I believe in my own creative instincts. And I think like necessity is the mother of invention. And I'm going to figure out how the novel is structured because I'm going to have to. That's the way it's going to go. That is all. So far it's made it easier actually, because again, I don't have like an undetermined amount of time to like navel gaze. I have to come up with some way the character is going to get from point A to point B. And there are many ways. I just have to pick one.
I love that. Yeah, that was my own reason for launching my personal newsletters, is that I know I wouldn't have written it if I didn't have some sort of nice public pressure holding me accountable. Final question. I want you to answer this and take your time on it and take in whatever direction you want. But like, what are some things that, you know, you wish people asked you about more often, or put a different way, maybe like, what are some things about writing that you don't think are quite talked about enough, whether that's just in the Twitter sphere or, you know, things that a lot of people just kind of misunderstand or underappreciate about writing? Yeah, feel free to answer that however you'd like, but like, what are just some of the things that you wish more people were talking about or even asking you about?
Can you give me like 30 seconds? That's an excellent and like super hard question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's hard to do a Google search for the things that aren't talked about, because that's sort of like running in the opposite direction of my natural salience filter. So like, give me a sec.
Yes. And I'll invite everyone who's on the call. You're welcome to propose your own answers in the chat. I think I don't even know what my answer would be, but everyone's welcome to make their suggestion.
Oh, so I think related to our discussion on finding your personal monopoly, the importance of reading and writing experimentally. A lot of my value add as a coach, for example, is just I work with clients in tech and then I send them like 10 great English poems that everybody who has an English degree has read, but nobody who hasn't has. And it just blows their minds. And I think there's so much low-hanging fruit in the world that you probably haven't encountered. And that's really to your writing practice. So, hey, like, try writing in fragments, try writing a diary of this week, try writing your manifesto about how to change the world, try writing a sonnet, try writing a fable, try writing things you haven't written before, and try reading things you haven't read before. Like, you know, you think you hate poetry, but like, are you sure? You think you hate self-help books, like, do you really? Like, you know, there's a lot of I think in life in general and art specifically, like, people fall on the explore side of explore exploit, or sorry, the exploit side of explore exploit far often. Like, they like exploit existing resources rather than exploring to see if there are new resources. I think, like, I often use this metaphor with my clients. Like, think of your creative life as this ecosystem, like a rainforest that's super intricate. Like, there are lots of different organisms interacting, and like, this ecosystem produces one extremely valuable crop, this like one tasty fruit. But the presence of the tasty fruit is premised upon there being a large diversity of organisms in that environment. So I think, like, you know, all of this talk of like optimization, like niching down, finding what people want to hear, you can lose that, like, creative inputs are a big part of creative outputs.
That is a spectacular answer and a perfect note to end on. I think we can all take our own homework assignment from that to go write some satire, go write some poetry, go write some weird stuff. If everyone was just a little bit weirder on Twitter, I think it would be a more fun website. Yeah, Lyle BRB, gonna read some poetry. Well, Sasha, I guess final question I'll ask you is, where can people go to follow along with the new book? And maybe we'll leave it there. And anything else you're working on that you'd want folks to check out?
They are welcome to go to verymodernvampire.com or modernvampire.substack.com. There they will find everything they need: a handy subscribe button, as well as a Square integrated payment system if they choose to give me money for the offerings that are available. The other thing I'm working on that I'm really happy about are catalogs published by a gallery in Sweden. So if you happen to be passing through Stockholm, stop by Loyal Gallery and buy their recent catalogs. I don't think that work is available in any other way, which is like, it's kind of fun. It's kind of, you know, anachronistic, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you can read my Substack, but for the really good stuff, go to Sweden.
That's the sort of out of the box thinking that I hope everyone is inspired to leave here and do. But Sasha, I know I've been a poor timekeeper. We've just run over, but I want to thank you for making the time for this conversation. I have, per usual, pages of notes and a ton of things I want to go go do. Thank you for making the time, and thank you everyone for joining us live. We're going to send out this recording shortly. We will edit it and publish it in the next 24 to 48 hours. In the meantime, Sasha, where should people find you? Is Twitter? I know you're almost in the 5K club. Have we crossed that milestone yet on Twitter?
No,
Could this be our chance?
No, we have not. I think it's good to want things in life. You know, it's good to, I'm just checking it now. It's good to have things that are unattainable that you can try to attain.
Right, the next milestone.
4996. Oh boy.
Oh my God. Perfect. I'm going to tell people to go to Twitter to follow along, just so we can break this threshold together, per your tweet yesterday. But Sasha, I just want to thank you again for making the time, and already looking forward to hopefully round 2 at some point.
Thanks so much for your great questions. Thank you to Tash for following. And thanks for being here. This has been really, really fun.
This is a blast.
And I will see you on Slack very soon, my friend.
Indeed. And thank you, everybody. See you all there as well. See ya. $4.99. Let's go. One more. See ya.